voice that resonates like thunder, Jordan Peterson unveils his magnum opus, 12 Rules for Life, an antidote to chaos. A profound manifesto that pierces the very heart of human existence. Like a modern-day prophet, Jordan Peterson's words cascade like a torrential downpour, as he offers a lifeline amidst the chaotic storms of life, illuminating the path to meaning, to purpose, and personal transformation.
So there's this line in the New Testament, which is kind of mysterious, you might say, but it's really an instruction set, and the line is approximately, knock and the door will open, ask and you will receive, seek and you will find. And you think, well, no way, that can't possibly be true.
With each rule etched in fire, Jordan Peterson's voice reverberates to the depths of the human soul, awakening dormant spirits and challenging the status quo, offering a roadmap to navigate the tumultuous terrain of existence. In a world teetering on the edge of chaos, Jordan Peterson emerges as a guiding light, his words painting a vivid tapestry of wisdom and introspection.
The first rule, which is kind of a comical rule, is stand up straight with your shoulders back. And it's a meditation, among other things, on the habits of lobsters. I read some papers on lobsters must be 10 years ago, I guess, and they just absolutely blew me away. And one of the things I've really loved about being a psychologist, and there's many things, but I've really loved psychoanalytic theory and the great clinicians, the behaviorists as well. I mean, Freud, Jung, Adler, Carl Rogers, Abraham Maslow, the behaviorists like Skinner and the cognitive behaviorists. I mean, I've learned a tremendous amount from reading the clinicians. And so if any of you are interested in psychology, I would really recommend reading the great clinicians, because you learn so much about life. It's crazy by reading them. So that's been fun. But then on the entirely other end of the spectrum, where I've learned most about psychology, is from the really low, what would you call them, the really science-oriented animal behaviorists. That's where they turned into the neuroscientists, right? They were the animal behaviorists, first of all, and then they turned into the neuroscientists. I've learned a tremendous amount from them. They're such clear thinkers. The best of the bunch, I think, there's two of them. One named Jeffrey Gray, who wrote a book called The Neuropsychology of Anxiety, which is just a deadly book. It's impossible to read. It takes like 6 months to read it, because I think he read like 1,800 papers to write it or something like that. And he actually read them. That's the cool thing. And he understood them, which is really something. And then there's another guy named Jaak Panksepp, who wrote a book called Affective Neuroscience, which outlines his studies, for example, of rats. He was the guy who learned that rats laugh if you tickle them with the end of a pencil eraser, but they laugh ultrasonically like bats. So you have to slow down the ultrasonic vocalization before you can hear them giggle. And you'd think, why the hell would you spend your time tickling rats with a pencil and making them laugh? But see, what he demonstrated there was that there was a play circuit in mammals, that there's a psychobiological basis for rough and tumble play, for example. It's a bloody big deal, you know, discovering a whole new circuit in the brain. That's like discovering a continent. It's Nobel Prize winning stuff. And Panksepp's Affective Neuroscience, I would highly recommend that. So there's this other book I know about too, which is 12 Rules for Life, which you could also look into if you want. Anyways, I was reading these articles on lobsters, and I came across this finding that lobsters governed their postural flexion with serotonin. And I thought, God, that's so interesting. It's so flexion is to stand up straight. I thought, wow, that's so interesting, because, you know, depressed people crouch over. I wonder if there's any link between those two things. And then I went and read a whole pile of papers on lobster and lobster neurochemistry. Lobster neurochemistry is actually quite well understood, because they have a fairly simple nervous system, right? And so if you want to understand a complex nervous system, it's a good idea to understand a simple one first and then sort of elaborate upwards. And it turns out that serotonin governs status, emotional regulation, and posture in lobsters, just like it does in human beings.
Inviting us to confront our inner demons and strive for order amidst the overwhelming chaos. With unwavering conviction and a voice that cuts through the noise, Jordan Peterson unveils his 12 Rules for Life.
One thing that Chapter 1 is about is the fact that if a lobster is defeated in a dominance battle, you can give it essentially antidepressants and it will fight again. And that just blew me away. You know, it's so remarkable, because one of the things it tells you is that, so if you're imagine that you could be lobster top dog or bottom dog. Imagine there's 10 strata in the lobster hierarchy. And so you could be number 1, right, top lobster, number 10, bottom lobster. If you're bottom lobster, you have low serotonin levels and high octopamine levels. That's a neurochemical that human beings don't produce. And if you're a top lobster, you have high serotonin levels and low octopamine levels. And you can move a lobster in its dominance hierarchy by moderating its levels of serotonin. And I thought that's so interesting, because what it means is that the counter that keeps track of our status, and we have a counter in a sense in our minds that keeps track of our status, is 1/3 of a billion years old. And what that also means is that the idea of the hierarchy, let's call it a dominance hierarchy, because within lobsters it's kind of like a physical prowess hierarchy, something like that. The idea of the hierarchy is at least 350 million years old. So I was thinking the other day about numbers. You know, there are mathematicians who think that there isn't anything more real than numbers. And that's an interesting proposition. I mean, it's obviously the case that once you invent or discover numbers, that confers on you a tremendous power. Who knows the limits of that power? And the claim that numbers are more real than anything else is predicated in part on the fact that when you discover them or invent them and start to utilize them, that your ability to operate in the world expands immensely. And so that's one of the ways of judging whether or not something is real, is whether or not when you use it, it facilitates your means of operating in the world. Interestingly, numbers are abstractions. And so that raises another question, which is, well, what's more real? The thing that's being abstracted from, or the abstractions? And again, that's not obvious. And maybe the question of more real isn't germane. Maybe it's a question of equal reality. But it's not obvious that abstractions aren't real. And you can make a damn strong case that they're more real than anything else. And so then you might ask yourself, well, then what are the most real abstractions? And so that's what I'm going to start to talk about tonight. I'm going to talk about it in relationship to as many rules as I can lay out simultaneously. I'll go through the rules first. So rule 1 is stand up straight with your shoulders back. And rule 2 is treat yourself like you're someone responsible for helping. And number 3, which is very tightly associated with number 2, they're sort of variations on a theme, is make friends with those people who want the best for you. And by the way, these last 2 rules aren't injunctions designed to make your life easier. They're actually injunctions designed to make your life more difficult. Kierkegaard said at one point that his role in life, given that everything was proceeding to become easier and easier in all possible ways, that there would come a time when people would cry out for difficulty. And so that's partly how he envisioned his role in the world, interestingly enough, as a universal benefactor of mankind who would strive to do nothing other than to make life more difficult for everyone. Right, and so rule 2 and 3 are like that, because treat yourself as if you're someone responsible for helping isn't the same as be nice to yourself. It's not that. And to associate with people who want the best for you means that they get to demand the best from you. And that's also not an easy thing. Rule 4 is compare yourself to who you were yesterday and not to who someone else is today. And that's an injunction about envy, right? It's easy. You need you need things that are above you, because you need to do something worthwhile with your life. You need something to aim at, but one of the consequences of that is that you can become envious of people that you believe have attained more in a deserved or undeserved manner, and that can make you bitter. And so it's much better to compare yourself to yourself and to use yourself as the target for improvement and comparison. Rule 5 is don't let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. And the rule of thumb there is if you dislike them, then other people will. And it's a bad idea to allow your children to act in a way that makes other children dislike them or adults dislike them, given that they're going to have to deal with children and they're going to have to deal with adults. So your primary responsibility as a parent is to help your child learn how to behave so that the social world opens up its arms to them and welcomes them at every level. And you've done your job if you can manage that, and it's not a simple thing to do. Rule 6 is put your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. And that's not take no action for others until you have your act together. That isn't what the rule means. It means that bind your ambition with humility and work on what's right in front of you that you will suffer for if you get wrong before you engage in the large-scale transformation of other people. Rule 7 is do what is meaningful and not what is expedient. And I would say in some sense that's the core ethos of the book. Not exactly, because rule 8, which is tell the truth or at least don't lie, is a necessary conjunction to that, or a necessary additional element, because I don't think that you can pursue what is meaningful without telling the truth. And the reason for that is if you don't tell the truth, or let's say if you lie, which is an easier way to think about it, you corrupt the mechanisms, the instinctual mechanisms that manifest themselves as meaning, and then you can't trust them. And that's a very bad idea. So the fundamental reason to not lie is because you corrupt your own perceptions if you lie. And when you corrupt your own perceptions, then you can't rely on yourself. And if you can't rely on yourself, then, well, good luck to you. Because what are you going to rely on in the absence of your own judgment? You've got nothing if you lose that. Rule 8 is, as I said, tell the truth or at least don't lie. Rule 9, assume that the person that you're listening to knows something you don't. And that's not so much a mark of respect for the person, although it is that. It's a mark of recognition of your own unbearable ignorance. You know, one of the things you have to do in life, you have to decide what's more important, what you know or what you don't know. First of all, there's a lot of what you don't know. And so if you make friends with that, if you decide that's important, then, well, that's a good thing, because you're going to be surrounded by what you don't know your entire life. And so if you're appreciative of that, then that's going to make things go better for you. But the other element of that is, well, why should you be appreciative of what you don't know? And the answer to that is, well, you shouldn't. If your life is absolutely perfect in every way, you have exactly what you need and want, you've put everything in order around you, then what you know is sufficient. But if you believe that things could still be put right around you in your own personal life, and with regard to the effect that you have on other people, then obviously what you don't yet know is more important than what you do know, and you should be paying attention to find out what you don't know at every possible moment. And if you're fortunate when you have a conversation with someone and you're actually interested in what they say, then even if they're not very good at communicating, even if they're awkward, or even if they display a certain amount of enmity towards you, there's always the possibility that they might tell you something you don't know, in which case you can walk away from the conversation less ignorant and corrupt than you were when you started the conversation. And if your life isn't everything that you would like it to be, then being slightly less ignorant and corrupt is probably a good thing. And so rule 10 is be precise in your speech. And that's an observation, I would say, that's a variant of a New Testament injunction, which is, or maybe a description of the nature of the world, which is knock and the door will open, and ask and you will receive, which is a very strange theory, let's say, but which I would say is far more in accordance with what we know about the psychology of perception, let's say, than you might imagine, because it is the case that you don't get what you don't aim at. You might get what you do aim at, and your aim might get better as you aim as well, which is something to consider.